In this episode, we're going to make acceptable use guidelines for AI feel like a practical safety rail for everyday behavior, not a lecture that people tune out. When learners are new to security, it is easy to imagine that risk mostly comes from hackers, but a huge amount of real harm comes from normal people making normal mistakes under time pressure. AI tools amplify that risk because they are convenient, they feel smart, and they invite people to paste information into them without thinking about where that information goes or how outputs might be used. Acceptable use guidelines exist to remove guesswork by telling people what is allowed, what is not allowed, and what to do when they are unsure, so safe behavior becomes the default. They also protect the organization by creating consistent expectations that can be taught, monitored, and improved over time. By the end, you should understand what acceptable use guidelines are, why they matter in AI security, and how to design them so they actually change behavior in the real world. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Acceptable use guidelines are different from a policy, even though they are closely related, because guidelines are written for daily choices rather than high-level governance intent. A policy typically states what the organization requires, while guidelines translate that requirement into clear behavioral expectations that a student, an employee, or a manager can follow without needing a security background. For AI, the gap between policy and behavior can be large, because people may not understand what counts as sensitive, what counts as an approved tool, or what risks exist when prompts and outputs are stored or shared. Guidelines close that gap by giving plain language examples of safe patterns and unsafe patterns, and by explaining how to make a safe choice when the situation is not obvious. Beginners should notice that good guidelines are not written as threats or punishment, because fear-based guidance tends to create hiding and bypass. Instead, good guidelines are written to help people succeed, meaning they show the safe path and make it easier than the risky path. When organizations get this right, they reduce both accidental data exposure and misuse of AI outputs as if they were guaranteed truth. Acceptable use is therefore a frontline control that sits where humans and AI systems actually meet. The first thing an acceptable use guideline must do is define what counts as AI use in the organization, because ambiguity is the enemy of safe behavior. If employees are unsure whether a feature is considered AI, they will not know the rules apply, and they will guess. A practical definition focuses on behavior and outcomes, such as tools that generate text, summarize documents, create recommendations, classify content, or automate decisions using learned patterns. The guideline should also clarify what counts as an approved AI system, because many organizations allow certain tools but not others, and the difference often relates to data handling, contractual protections, and monitoring capability. Beginners should understand that approval is not about whether a tool is popular. It is about whether the organization can manage risk and meet obligations when the tool is used. A clear definition and approval boundary also helps governance because it makes it possible to build an inventory and maintain oversight. Without this clarity, acceptable use becomes an unenforceable suggestion rather than a practical rule set. A second essential element is describing the main categories of risky behavior in plain language, because people cannot avoid risk they cannot recognize. One category is sensitive input risk, meaning people paste confidential business information, personal data, or protected records into an AI tool without permission. Another category is output misuse risk, meaning people treat an AI output as correct and authoritative and act on it without verification, especially in high-impact situations. Another category is unintended disclosure risk, meaning outputs are shared widely, forwarded externally, or stored in places where they become accessible to people who should not see them. Another category is scope creep risk, meaning a tool approved for one purpose gets used for a different purpose, such as using a writing assistant to analyze sensitive customer cases. Another category is dependency risk, meaning a vendor tool changes behavior or data handling, and users keep using it as if nothing changed. Beginners should notice that none of these require malicious intent because they are often driven by convenience and optimism. Acceptable use guidelines reduce harm by naming these risks clearly and giving people safe alternatives. Data rules are usually the heart of acceptable use guidance, because data is what makes AI tools valuable and what makes them dangerous. The guideline should help users recognize sensitive data categories in a simple way, such as personal data, confidential business information, proprietary code, contracts, internal financial details, and incident information. It should also clarify that prompts can contain sensitive information and that prompts and outputs may be stored, logged, or used for system improvement depending on the tool and settings. Beginners often assume that if a tool is inside a browser, the text disappears when they close the tab, but many systems retain prompts and outputs for troubleshooting, monitoring, or service improvement. Acceptable use guidance therefore needs to teach a habit. Treat every prompt as if it could be retained and reviewed, and never include information you would not want exposed beyond the approved boundary. The guideline should also emphasize data minimization, meaning users should include only what is necessary to perform the task, because unnecessary details create unnecessary exposure. When users can identify data risk quickly, they stop guessing and start choosing safer patterns automatically. Acceptable use guidance should also address what safe prompting looks like without drifting into technical instruction, because the way a user frames a request can change the risk dramatically. A safe pattern is to describe a task in general terms and use placeholders rather than real identifiers when possible, especially for training, drafting, or brainstorming. Another safe pattern is to use approved internal knowledge sources or approved tools designed for sensitive contexts rather than using a general-purpose tool. Another safe pattern is to keep inputs short and controlled, because long-copied documents often contain hidden sensitive details that the user did not notice. Beginners should understand that the goal is not to ban AI use, but to shape it so the organization can benefit without creating uncontrolled exposure. The guideline can also teach users to avoid asking the system to reveal secrets or to retrieve sensitive information from internal systems unless the system is explicitly designed and approved for that purpose. This reduces the risk of both accidental leakage and intentional probing. When safe prompting habits are normalized, many common incidents simply never occur. A common failure in acceptable use is not clearly separating low-risk uses from high-risk uses, which leads to either reckless behavior or unnecessary fear. Low-risk uses might include drafting generic text, brainstorming ideas, or summarizing public information that contains no sensitive content. High-risk uses might include making decisions about people, analyzing confidential records, producing legal or compliance advice, or interacting with internal incident information. The guidelines should explain that high-risk use requires additional oversight, such as approval, documented review, or human verification, because the consequences of error or unfairness are larger. Beginners should notice that this is not about distrusting the tool. It is about matching rigor to impact, which is a recurring theme across AI governance. When users understand that some uses are safe with light rules and other uses require stronger controls, they are less likely to either overuse AI or avoid it entirely. This balance also reduces bypass, because people are more willing to follow rules that feel proportionate. Acceptable use guidelines work best when they are clearly risk-based rather than one-size-fits-all. Another critical topic is accuracy and verification, because many risky outcomes come from treating AI outputs as truth rather than as suggestions. The guidelines should teach a simple expectation that AI outputs can be wrong, incomplete, outdated, or overly confident, and that users must verify before acting, especially when decisions affect customers, finances, or safety. Verification can be described as checking against trusted sources, confirming facts, and using human judgment rather than automatically accepting the output. Beginners sometimes assume that a fluent answer means a correct answer, but AI systems can produce plausible-sounding errors, and those errors can spread quickly if outputs are copied into emails, reports, or customer communications. Acceptable use guidance should also warn against using AI to create authoritative statements in areas like legal, medical, or compliance without required oversight, because that can create serious liability. Another important point is that AI may not know the organization's specific policies unless it is designed for that, so users should not rely on it to interpret internal rules. When verification habits are embedded in guidelines, the organization reduces both operational mistakes and reputational harm. Acceptable use guidelines should clearly address intellectual property and confidentiality because AI tools intersect with both in subtle ways. Users may paste proprietary code, product plans, or internal documents into a tool to get help, without realizing they may be disclosing valuable information. They may also generate content that unintentionally resembles copyrighted material, or they may assume the organization owns everything an AI system produces without understanding terms of use. Beginners should not be expected to interpret complex licensing language, but guidelines can set simple behavioral expectations, such as not inputting proprietary code or confidential documents into unapproved tools and not presenting AI-generated material as if it came from a verified authoritative source. The guideline can also emphasize that confidential information includes internal strategy, customer contracts, and incident details, not just obvious secrets like passwords. Another subtle risk is that outputs may contain sensitive fragments if the input contained them, so confidentiality rules apply to outputs as well. When confidentiality expectations are clear, employees can act safely without needing to become legal experts. Another area that must be covered is identity, access, and account behavior, because acceptable use is not only about what you type, it is also about how you access and share systems. The guideline should make it clear that users must use approved accounts, must not share accounts, and must not bypass access controls to give others access informally. This matters in AI systems because access determines who can view sensitive outputs, who can connect the system to data sources, and who can trigger actions based on outputs. Beginners often see access control as an IT detail, but it is one of the strongest protections against misuse, because many incidents occur when someone has more access than they need. Acceptable use guidance can also address safe sharing, meaning users should not paste outputs into public channels or external communications without reviewing for sensitive content and without following communication rules. It can also set expectations for reporting lost devices or suspected account compromise, because compromised accounts can be used to exfiltrate data through AI tools. When account behavior is included, acceptable use becomes a complete behavioral boundary, not just a note about data. Guidelines should also define what to do when the tool behaves unexpectedly or produces unsafe content, because hesitation and confusion can make an incident worse. Users should know how to report a concerning output, such as an output that includes sensitive internal data, hateful content, or instructions that violate policy. They should also know what immediate steps are expected, such as stopping use, not sharing the output further, and escalating to the proper owner or response team. Beginners often assume incident response is only for malware and breaches, but AI incidents can be about harmful outputs or misuse patterns, and those still require evidence and coordinated response. The guideline should encourage early reporting and make it psychologically safe, because employees will not report issues if they fear punishment for asking questions. It should also clarify that reporting is a responsibility, not a personal failure, because the goal is to protect the organization and the people affected. When reporting and escalation are clear, the organization can detect and contain harm faster and can improve controls based on real signals. Acceptable use guidance therefore supports both prevention and detection. An effective acceptable use guideline also anticipates organizational reality by including a clear path for uncertainty and exceptions, because not every situation fits neatly into predefined rules. Users need to know who to contact when they are unsure whether data is safe to use, whether a tool is approved, or whether a use case is high impact. They also need to know how to request approval when a legitimate business need exists, so the system does not push people into bypass behavior. Exceptions should be framed as controlled, documented decisions, not informal permissions granted in hallway conversations. Beginners should understand that exceptions can be necessary, but unmanaged exceptions create hidden risk because they are not tracked, reviewed, or time-bound. A clear exception path helps the organization learn, because repeated exception requests often reveal gaps in policy or a need for new approved tools. It also improves fairness across teams, because everyone follows the same process rather than relying on personal relationships. When uncertainty is addressed directly, guidelines reduce guessing and reduce the temptation to take shortcuts. Acceptable use guidelines are only effective when they are integrated with training and reinforced through daily habits, because people cannot follow rules they do not remember. The guideline should therefore be teachable, meaning it can be summarized and reinforced in short training moments without losing clarity. It should also be connected to real examples of everyday work, like drafting emails, summarizing meeting notes, or preparing customer responses, so users see how the rules apply in practice. Beginners should recognize that training is not only initial onboarding, because AI tools and threats change, and users need refreshers when new capabilities appear. Reinforcement can also come from simple reminders and workflows, such as prompts that warn users not to include sensitive data in certain contexts, as long as those reminders are consistent with policy. Another key factor is leadership modeling, because when leaders use AI responsibly and talk about it openly, it normalizes safe behavior. Guidelines reduce risky behavior most effectively when they are part of culture, not just a document. That cultural embedding is a hidden but powerful control. Measuring and improving acceptable use is also important, because guidelines should evolve based on real behavior and real incidents. Measurement might include tracking the frequency of reported issues, the number of policy questions, patterns of misuse, and the rate of adoption of approved tools. It can also include reviewing incidents where sensitive data appeared in outputs or where users relied on outputs without verification. Beginners should understand that measurement is not only about surveillance. It is about feedback that helps the organization reduce confusion and improve safety. If many users ask the same question, the guideline might be unclear and need revision. If violations occur frequently in a certain area, the organization might need better training, clearer thresholds, or better approved tools that make safe behavior easier. Improvement should also include incorporating lessons learned into updated guidance and training, so the program becomes stronger over time. This continuous improvement loop is part of mature governance, because it shows the organization is not just writing rules, but actually managing behavior and risk. Acceptable use guidelines are living controls that become more effective when they learn from reality. As we wrap up, acceptable use guidelines reduce risky AI behavior by turning complex security and compliance expectations into clear, everyday rules that normal people can follow without guessing. They define what AI use means in the organization, clarify what tools are approved, and describe the major categories of risky behavior in plain language so users can recognize danger early. They set clear expectations for data handling, safe prompting habits, verification of outputs, and protection of confidentiality and intellectual property, while also addressing account behavior and safe sharing. They provide a clear path for reporting unsafe outputs and escalating uncertainty, which supports fast response and discourages bypass. They become truly effective when integrated with training, reinforced through daily habits, and improved through measurement and lessons learned. For the AAISM exam and for real-world governance, the key insight is that many AI risks are human behavior risks, and acceptable use guidance is one of the most direct ways to shape that behavior responsibly. When guidelines are clear, proportionate, and easy to follow, they protect both the organization and the people who rely on AI outcomes, and they make safe AI use feel normal rather than burdensome.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.